Okay, so I'll get started. I'm sure that some more will join us as we go along. Hopefully they won't miss too much. Many thanks to everyone who's registered, and for those of you who've joined us on previous webinars, welcome again. Today's session, as I said, is the final webinar for us for 2023, but lots of great webinars to come in the new year. Today we're going to be focusing very much on where we are now, sort of mid-December, leading into the Christmas period. For many organizations, they'll be closing down. Perhaps other organizations, depending on their sector, will be incredibly busy. It might be their busiest time of the year. So we're going to talk about why it is the season to be concerned in terms of data breaches and cyber attacks. And we're going to focus on just 4 key subjects today. So we're going to be talking about cybercrime seasonality and why it is such a seasonal issue, and why we see so many more attacks and why it peaks this time of year, and a little bit more about what's behind that in terms of the Christmas trend, some festive close down tips from our cybersecurity experts who I'll introduce in a moment, and then a look ahead to next year, what to expect, and some tips in terms of building a bit of a cybersecurity roadmap, so that it's not just about what you can do between now and Christmas in the new year, but what you can actually plan ahead for 2024. We'll have some opportunities for questions, and if questions do come in during the session that I feel the guys can answer on the run, then absolutely we'll pause and we'll answer those questions as best we can. Today's panel is entirely made up of more ClearComm experts. We have Maritz, Cloete and Shah. It'd be great if you guys could just briefly introduce yourselves and your roles within the team.
Okay, hi there. Hello, everybody. My name is Maritz. I'm a director at ClearComm. I look after the team that delivers cybersecurity and IT assurance services. I've been in, I guess, cybersecurity for the last probably going on 20 years. And I don't like to think of it in that term, but yeah, it seems like it's been about 20 years. And I've been working with clients both from sort of FTSE all the way down to one-man bands. So I've got a reasonable sort of level of experience in terms of how cybersecurity applies to organizations of all sizes. So yeah.
Thanks, Maritz.
Hi everyone, my name is Paris. I'm one of the consultants here at More ClearComm. I have a background in physical security and IT. I've joined More ClearComm last year now. I think it's been almost a year and a bit now. And yeah, I take care of the Cyber Essentials assessments here, and also look at the governance and technical security areas for More ClearComm. Thanks,
Paris. So the format today is very relaxed. It's a bit of a fireside chat conversation about all the subjects you can see listed. I will introduce a range of sort of the latest data and trends and some concerning numbers, and then the guys will interact with me as we go along, and we'll have sort of answer some questions, as I said, as we can. First, I must apologise for the terrible joke on the right-hand side of the screen. Obviously, Andy Williams didn't sing that it was the most vulnerable time of the year, but I thought it was quite appropriate. It's a bit of a Christmas cracker standard joke, which I take responsibility for, but I thought it was a good fit. So let's talk a bit about the seasonality of cybercrime. It is nearly Christmas time. This time of year, unfortunately, we see significant 30% increase in the average monthly of ransomware attacks during the holiday period, which is reported by Darktrace. And we also see, I mean, obviously I'm referring to November, which has already passed, but we see a 70% increase in attempted ransomware attacks in the 2 months leading up to Christmas, as opposed to January and February. So there is a real obvious trend there, and a real sort of spike, which I'll ask the guys to comment on in a moment. As you can expect, there's a surge in online shopping this time of year, increased social media usage, and a lot more digital communication. And we know that cyber attackers are using this increase of traffic to target the unsuspecting and vulnerable users who may be a bit less aware of the threat. The reality is as well, with businesses that maybe either shut down or people take some leave, the IT teams are a little bit thin on the ground this time of year. And we know that attacks might take place while a business or organization is closed, and it can remain undiscovered. And I know in particular that happens with in the sectors such as education. So it'd be really interesting, guys, if you could sort of pick a few of these out and give your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the people side of things really struggle during Christmas, because I think everybody gets to Christmas and they really run down. It's been a really long year. Everybody's looking forward to just taking a good break, taking a few weeks off. And I think that in that sort of scenario, given that the work is still pretty hectic, everybody's trying to fit everything into a very short month. It is easy to make mistakes, and it's easy for fraudsters or for cyber attackers to, for example, send an email that somebody wouldn't normally click on a link, clicks on the link, And it's all probably also, I know our IT team is also very busy at this moment, and also they're still struggling with people going off with COVID. Even now, people are falling ill, and also all kinds of different sort of wintertime illnesses. As you say, teams are thin on the ground, and attackers actually exploit that as well, because they'll phone staff pretending to be IT. Because I know we use that as a tactic for some of our penetration testing, and people, their guard are definitely down. People's guard is definitely down over this period, and that's why some of the ransomware attacks tend to be successful, because we're not as on top of it as we would be for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think Christmas is generally a positive time of the year. So, of course, attackers will play on that. It's not a holiday for them. It's a holiday for us who work day to day. So they will take advantage of that for sure.
Yeah. Is it the case that, we know that cyber crime is well organized, regardless of whether it's sort of nation state backed or even sort of opportunists, but what kind of research would they do to identify particular companies that might be,
I think,
a bit vulnerable?
One of the main issues is a lot of companies don't look at their digital footprint. So they don't know what information they put out there on social media. A lot of companies will put that their staff is all away, they're closing down at this date. So that's generally a good idea for opportunists to say, well, let's see what their systems look like. And where they find vulnerabilities, they will exploit them. They know that the response time might be delayed. Staff are on leave, so they could call staff if they manage to find their details online. So there's a treasure trove of information out there that is readily available for potential attackers. It's just, what is the lowest hanging fruit for them? So, if you're posting mobile numbers and such on social media, on your organization's LinkedIn page, then it's easy pickings for them, really, to at least attempt. And then your other controls will come in place. If users are vigilant, maybe they are, maybe they're not. As we said, it's a positive time, so it wouldn't take much for them to be convinced, unless they're made aware of those things, which we'll discuss later on as well.
Yeah, and interesting. We obviously commented on the fact that IT or security teams are going to be short-staffed. That means that potentially some of the team are at home but on call. But a really interesting bit of research by Cyber Reason found out that in the event of a cyber attack or something going wrong, when the IT teams are called in to kind of try and deal with that, 70% of them are admitting to being intoxicated or under the influence of alcohol while trying to defend their company, which is, when you think about it, is quite likely, isn't it? Because people are at home enjoying their family time and maybe having a drink, and suddenly they're called into work to defend a cyber attack. So that's all of these things would probably contribute to the success of the attack, I'm guessing.
I think cyber attackers also know about that, know that sort of seasonality, because we had a client a few years ago who the attackers managed to get into the network. In retrospect, they saw that about 2 weeks before Christmas, and they've been stealing data and so on, and they literally triggered a ransomware attack Boxing Day morning. They kicked the attack off, and that's not by accident at all. They know that it's right after Christmas, everybody's guarded down, and they'll get the maximum effect as well. So there's a slight sort of terrorism aspect to what cyber criminals do in terms of maximum effect. Absolutely.
Yeah. Paris touched on the heightened mood of people at Christmas, and I know we're going to touch on that going forward, because the human psychology of this subject is always right front and center. So why is it worse for businesses? We know that statistically, organizations are more likely to be attacked by criminals at Christmas than any other time of the year. We've alluded to the fact that the risks are higher because this lapses in workplace vigilance and unattended systems. Heightened team mood and positivity definitely leads to lower diligence and risk concern. When we're in a really positive, vibrant, excited mood and everyone's having a great time at home, the worries and concerns of life seem to decrease slightly. So that may be that in the workplace, in the weeks leading up to the Christmas break, people are just a little bit less risk aware, and they let their guard down, maybe a bit more distracted. We know that organizations are winding down for Christmas, or as I mentioned at the start, some are actually building up to the, especially in hospitality, for instance. And we know that as people, we all suffer increased stress and anxiety, worries about our finances this time of year. So yeah, it'd be good to, if any experiences here that you sort of, does this sort of ring true with working with clients and, or even in our own sort of working lives?
I think definitely, from our side anyway, definitely also the change to working from home. I think, the sort of mental awareness and mental sort of situational awareness does definitely drop down around this time. And also, as you say, there's stress in finances. I mean, I think we're all sort of worried about money and so on, but it does sort of amplify things around Christmas as well. And that just allows people to be vulnerable, really, and staff to be vulnerable to all sorts of potential scams.
Absolutely. And I think the priority is generally not security for a lot of small to medium businesses at this time as well. I've worked with e-commerce businesses in the past, and Christmas is always the most busiest period for them. Cybersecurity and the awareness and detecting any potential incidents are not at the top of the priority. It's more about operations and delivery. And that is what attackers capitalize on, that they're not going to be specifically looking out for this. And that's the importance of, putting in place controls where, detection capabilities are there. So which again, we'll discuss later on. So
yeah, there's a recent attack on, I know that's been kind of perpetuating, booking.com. Would that potentially be, occurred in sort of late November? Would that be timed, do you think, in terms of people's Christmas breaks, or would it just be a bit of a random one?
Yeah, I think there is some timing, because as you said, hospitality increases at this time, shopping does, people are looking to find the best deals at this time of the year. Money's tight, financial stresses are there. So of course, attackers will capitalize. Organizations are more likely to pay out ransoms because they want to restore availability to their services during these times, because their losses will be far more significant.
Yeah.
So of course, I do think there is an element of pre-planning there for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, almost an accepted business cost. An accepted risk, isn't it? In terms of accidental data breaches, we also see a spike in those at this time of year in the workplace. So in that final week before annual leave or seasonal holidays, and I know I've had experience with clients when this happens just before the school holidays, for instance, we know that these things happen more mid to late afternoon due to fatigue, and approaching the end of the day, etc. And even rushing to do the school run, which can have an effect on people sort of rushing to get something done and have to get out. We know that, again, high stress, pressure and anxiety, and when rushing to clear desks or workloads before a weekend. And I think the kind of ground zero peak time is probably Fridays between 3 and 5 p.m. Sorry, I'm having a couple of problems with my clicker. So and that's the peak time for accidental data breaches, the most likely time that phishing emails will be clicked, and when we'd be most exposed to business email compromise. And I would love to ask one of you to explain a bit more about business email compromise and what that looks like and how we might expect to see it.
I can pick that one up. I mean, business email compromise is quite a complex little bit of fraud that somebody could commit. So essentially, they'll start by taking over somebody's email account, either by obtaining their login details in some way, shape, or form. And this is not just maybe your own staff's email account, but maybe a supplier's email account as well. And what they'll do is they'll spend a bit of time working out what's happening in the business, reading through emails, understanding what transactions are going on. And what they will do is then try and insert themselves into that transaction in a way where, for example, they may ask you to change bank details for a certain payment because they know a big transaction is going through. They'll pretend to be the supplier or somebody from the supplier, or they might pretend to be somebody in finance. Any way to sort of try and convince you to change a payment into a specific account of their choosing. So that's typically how business email compromise happens. And I know we've had quite a lot of clients who've lost a lot of money this way. I know a church group that's paid a building contractor about £600,000 in one go, and 2 weeks later the building contractor came back to ask for their money, and they realized actually somebody managed to change the invoice for the building contractor, reissued the invoice with the different bank account details, and their controls weren't strong enough to actually stop that bank account change from happening within the internal system. So the back payment went out. So again, with business email compromise, often the fraudster will have a bit of a story around raising importance, raising the sort of urgency of the request. And again, around Christmas, everybody wants to get paid around Christmas, for example. So there may be a supplier, they say, we're keen to get paid. Here's the invoice. We've also had a recent bank account change. Can we please, can you please process this payment today? We need the money now. And before you know it, a week later, you realize you've made a big payment to a fraudulent bank account. And then often there's not that much that the banks can do to help, because it's legitimate business transaction. You know, it's not something like somebody stole your credit card. You actually made a payment to an account.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's really the business email compromise side. Normally starting with somebody's username and password being, or their credentials being stolen, so that somebody can get into an email account and then pretend to be them.
Yeah.
There are instances where also payroll data is changed for staff. I think Maritz, you've mentioned that in the past, haven't you, with me?
Yeah, quite cheekily. One of our clients, a staff member's email account got compromised, and the attacker worked out that firstly the attacker tried to phone HR to change the bank account details, and HR quite helpfully said you just need to log into the application. So because they already had access to the credentials, they logged into the HR application and changed the bank account details. And the first time the poor employee realized it happened was on payday, when she wasn't paid, because the money went to another account. So yeah, some of these guys are quite tricky, and it's actually quite a negative impact on staff as well. If you're subject to an attack like that, it's not your fault.
No,
but a lot of people feel quite personally responsible for that, and that's not a nice thing to have to suffer across the Christmas time either.
No, not at all. And these things happen to people, and the emotion of that must be horrendous. We've got a couple of good questions that have come in that I thought we might sort of pause and ask. So the first one: how do we really emphasize the message to staff to be hyper vigilant to threats around cybersecurity, and should senior management be sending out this messaging? I mean, we know that senior management should lead from the top anyway on this subject, but in terms of the time of year, is this something that should be increased?
I think there definitely needs to be more messaging around this, whether that's through your all hands meetings, for example, just mentioning it and urging people to apply a bit of professional skepticism to everything they see. If something looks a bit too good to be true, don't follow through with it. Also, to try and keep their business and their work and then their personal stuff slightly separate. So if they get an email for a good offer for a specific Christmas present, for example, that you might be looking for, don't be tempted to click on the link, because it may be a phishing email, maybe a phishing email that's come through, and then ultimately the business side of things might be compromised. So I think it's really important for messaging to come back from senior management saying, look, it's a way of looking after yourselves and the business, but your personal self as well, just to be aware of these sort of threats that are out there. So I think definitely it's worth senior management sending out some messages. I mean, I don't think it should be a barrage of messages. It's just something to sort of keep people aware that potentially the threats are out there, and just to apply professional skepticism.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's important to create a safe environment for people to report things to your IT team, whoever's designated, to create that safe culture where, even if it's mildly suspicious, that there's somebody they can go to and report it, and they can then investigate it or advise accordingly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We've got some great questions coming in, so we won't be able to answer all of them as we go, but and some of them are a little bit more technical. So what we will do in the when we get to sending out a copy of the slides and sort of supporting information, we'll also include answers to the questions. So I'll liaise with Maritz and Paris after to make sure that all of your questions are answered and included for everyone to see. So we'll go through some interesting case studies very briefly, just to sort of go through the high level sort of issues that occurred with them. Paris, are you right to lead on these and just sort of talk us through?
Yeah, just very briefly. So last year, Arnold Clark, who a car dealership and they do car hires and a lot of stuff in the motor industry. They had a breach on the suspected breach initially on the 23rd of December, so not so far from Christmas Day, and suspicious activity was detected on their network. So they kicked in, their incident response plan kicked in. They couldn't thwart the attack, but what they had to do is stop it at any cost, and that made them close off all access to the internet for all their branches. So of course that created a massive operational issue for them. No data was stolen as far as they've reported, but that again shows the potential of operational availability issues that might occur at this time of the year. It's likely that this was an opportunist attack, and they found their way through misconfiguration or unpatched system. So it could be one of many things, but again, if there's operational importance at this time of the year, especially for car hires and such. Well, no, sorry, in 2022, sorry.
That's a future attack.
Oh, this is about predictions, isn't it, really? Maybe it's a little bit too specific, sorry.
Yeah, that's my fault.
Cool, sorry.
Lost it. Yeah, so that's one of them. Another one was the Royal Mail ransomware attack earlier this year in January, so I'm sure a lot of us were affected by that. They were temporarily unable to send parcels abroad, and this was following strike action as well. So of course that's a timed attack, because there's importance for Royal Mail to get their services back up online, and potentially I'm not too sure if they did pay a ransom or not, but that puts them in a corner where they have to make a decision: do we pay it, or do we suffer the losses? I think they did suffer quite a bit this year.
Yeah, and then just a couple of others, again, sort of quite well-known attacks.
Yeah, so the Guardian. So this is probably something you wouldn't expect going into your offices in December, being locked out, potentially thinking it's not a Twitter situation here, but users were locked out, no access to printing or payroll. So again, as Maritz touched base earlier, this time of the year, people want to be paid, financial stresses and everything. So that was a ransomware attack. They again most likely paid a ransom. I don't know, Maritz, if you do you recall this one?
I don't know if they actually paid the ransom.
Yeah.
See, the recommendation is never to pay the ransom.
Never, yeah, exactly.
Because,
I mean, that's the whole industry now, where there are ransomware negotiators in place and things. So another one was the Vatican got taken down, and this was a day after the Pope criticized the war in Ukraine. And again, it could be a state actor, state-sponsored attackers doing this. Again, there's political reason, hacktivists as well. So this is another example. Even if you might say, well, what's the threat from we don't have any infrastructure, we don't, we use paper-based, so you still might have a website, and that can potentially affect your reputation and digital footprint.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paris. So what is the Christmas trend? So I know that our team sort of gets, and as individuals as well, we all see it, the sort of common sort of Christmas scams, but what drives it? Well, particularly in the UK, we spend more money on Christmas than any other nation in Europe, with nearly £31 billion forecast to be spent by UK shoppers this Christmas. 43% of that will be on credit cards to cover the Christmas spending, and that will amount to about £14 billion. And interestingly, 61% of Generation Z will use credit cards to cover their Christmas costs. And we know that from a previous webinar, all of which are available as recordings, it's Gen Z that are much more likely than the older generations to click on a phishing link, interestingly. So those two kind of stats go together. And all of that exposes us to the kind of frauds and scams that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. And we know that charities, for instance, are one of the highest, most likely sectors for attacks. Yeah, any thoughts on what you've seen there? It'd be interesting in terms of the fake shopping websites, how the sort of lengths and complexity of that, Paris, is a lot of effort going into building fake shopping websites.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, again, people are looking for the deals. Black Friday is always close to Christmas. There's people are looking to buy gifts and things. So, if you do receive an email saying, hey, I've got a good deal for you for a holiday, for a product, a lot of this data comes from trends. So if there's a new product that's out in the market, they'll look to capitalize on that. They'll send out a massive phishing campaign, which is, done from scrapes of websites and black on the dark web. Your email is probably out there. There's nothing that can avoid it. It's the credentials. So this is sent out to many people, and even if they've targeted 1,000+ people, maybe even if 10% do that, they're still going to be profitable. The infrastructure is very simple. There's not a lot of technical knowledge needed to do this. So once it's sent out, people will put their credit card details in. Generally, credit cards vendors will support you, and they'll be able to refund costs and such. But people are using their own debit cards and things, so that's not reversible in some instances. And sometimes they'll request payment in other forms, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies. They'll request for you to install software to receive a deal, and again, that potentially increases the chain of attack. They could use your device and capture credit card information and data from there as well.
Yeah. And nearly all of those instances are directly targeting and appealing the sort of the human sites, isn't it? It's the things that would excite us or fear us, or, like you said, something that's topical and we would expect to receive emails about. I know during the early part of COVID, there was a peak in phishing and SMS sort of messaging about hand sanitizer and PPE, because it was so topical and people needed it and it was in short supply. So yeah, so that all kind of links together there, I think.
A family member of mine is guilty of filling out a free bicycle form, and they're very well aware about these.
Yeah.
So it's again, they were shopping on a site and an email came from the same, looked like it came from the same site. They filled it out, got to the stage where they were about to put credit card details in, and then the kind of light bulb moment happened then. But the fact that you click on the link is already sometimes too late in these instances. Potentially malicious software can come through those attack techniques as well.
I think one scam that raises its head every single year is the boss loses his mobile phone number. He WhatsApps you pretending to be the boss, saying he wants to get the team something nice. Can you go out and buy some vouchers for him, please? If you do that, you can use your own card. He says he'll pay you back and everything. He'll ask you for the vouchers, scratch off the voucher sort of panel, pass the codes, because he wants to actually use the vouchers to buy presents or whatever. And ultimately, they'll just nick the vouchers and you won't get your money back. So, and it's surprising how common that is, how many people fall for that. In terms of that sort of scam. And no, you probably only lose maybe a couple hundred quid, but it's your own money that you lose. And actually,
is that the same strategy that's applied when a parent might get a text message from their supposed son or daughter saying they've lost their phone and they're using a friend's phone?
Yeah, because eventually they'll ask for money, right? That's what they're for. So so absolutely.
Actually, another threat there to discuss, or we could discuss here, QR code threats. So a lot of charities now are using QR codes for you to scan, and then it will take you to their payment page. So that's something to be wary about when you're out and about. You'll see there was, I think I saw an image the other day of the Salvation Army, and they had QR codes and RFID readers, so you can tap your payment card. So it wouldn't be difficult for someone to potentially put a device instead of the Salvation Army one, or put their own QR code sticker on it. It will take you to a similar website, and then you actually be ending up paying their accounts rather than the charity's account.
Yeah, there's a lady that lost a lot of money in that way with basically somebody stuck a different QR code at a parking lot and put the QR code up. So when they scan the QR code, that managed to compromise their mobile phone as well. So QR codes are really, really, really good. But the problem is you can't see where it sends you. So especially when emails, emails come through with QR codes on them as well. QR codes are very difficult for spam filters potentially to pick up on, because obviously it can't necessarily decode an image in that sense. But when you then follow that link with your phone, potentially it could be compromised. So again, it's just about professional skepticism, or just general skepticism over what you get through email. Don't trust anything that lands in your inbox, or even in your WhatsApp.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're listing what we call December threats here. That these are all the kind of threats that actually occur throughout the year. But obviously, we're focusing on the fact they peak particularly this time of year. It might be useful if we could give a bit of an overview for the benefit of everyone on today's webinar, who, for the most part, will have an organizational website, or they may even have e-commerce. What they might look out for, or what distributed denial of service is, and how that might affect them and attacks on their e-commerce websites.
So yeah, you see, distributed denial of service, essentially what attackers will do, they'll build up a lot of what they call bots, and that's basically slave computers which they've compromised, and then can control what they do. So essentially what they'll do is, if they want to launch a denial of service attack on a specific service, they'll just literally point thousands of machines to that one service, that one e-commerce website, and just nail it with requests. It may not be valid requests, but the poor server that sits behind the website will just become, all the resources will just be consumed in terms of batting away a lot of these requests. Now, there's a lot of really good controls you can put in place around that. For example, you can use services like Cloudflare and other sort of DNS protection services that actually provide DDoS attack protection as well. And if you don't, I would definitely consider looking into that, rather than just having your website open to the world directly. So, but yeah, the distributed denial of service attack is probably the worst thing for smaller businesses that have their own e-commerce sites, for them being taken down, and potentially held to ransom, because the attackers could essentially go, well, I'll just push this button if you don't pay me X amount of money. So it's just typical extortion. So yeah, that happens in this sort of cyber sphere as well.
Yeah, and I guess, as Paris mentioned earlier, that there's an increased likelihood, isn't there, that ransom will be paid if you're an organization that relies on your website being up and active through what could be your most profitable time of the year. You're definitely going to be more inclined to pay ransom, aren't you?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So some of this we've covered in different stages. In terms of Christmas period, we know that Christmas is deliberately picked up. We know that these attacks are planned for weeks and months in advance in lots of instances. I'd be really interested in coming back to this in a moment about how they can work undetected, guys, because that would be really interesting to hear about. Also about IT response contingency and what that might look like. We know that some attackers like the infamy or the fame of their attacks being published, so they know that an attack over Christmas is probably more likely to be reported in the media because of its impact. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know how an attack could go undetected, and in the lead up, and what a business could do to sort of search these potential attacks out.
Yeah, I think the reality is most organizations don't necessarily monitor what's happening on their IT systems in the background, right? So a lot of platforms like Office 365 have got a lot of logs which you really have to analyze to understand whether something weird is going on. So for example, you may have users logging in from a different country all of a sudden that's not linked to where they are. You may suddenly have visitors to your website from all over the world randomly, and suddenly you have a lot of traffic, but you don't have extra sales. But unfortunately, we don't necessarily have the bandwidth to be able to monitor what's happening. So a lot of the activity that the attacker can actually undertake could go undetected, because we're not looking out for those specific signs of suspicious activity. And that's why attackers could potentially get into somebody's network, onto the Office 365, and be there for weeks and months without being detected, because they know how to be quiet. They know how to not raise suspicion until they need to raise, until they want to sort of carry out the attack that they want to carry out. So so that's really the undetected side. More mature businesses may have what they call security operations centers, or staff that are dedicated to look out for these sort of issues, or they may have software like Darktrace, for example, which is designed to sort of be a little bit more proactive and use AI or machine learning to sort of look at the complex workings of the IT environment and be able to detect suspicious behavior. But even if you can detect it, what are you going to do about it? You still have to have some sort of plan to be able to respond to suspicious activity as well. And most organizations just aren't that developed in terms of their cybersecurity capabilities at this moment in time, which makes them more vulnerable, unfortunately.
Yeah. We have a good question that kind of relates to this. So any advice on the use of VPNs or multi-factor authentication in relation to reducing risk?
So multi-factor authentication is a must, but it's not infallible, I think is the main thing. Multi-factor authentication is if you log into a service or into Office 365 or a website, and it asks you to, it either sends you a code to your phone, or you've got an app on your phone which gives you a separate code, which you also have to enter. So therefore, if somebody got your username and password, they still need to be able to get something that you have, which is the code, to be able to access that service. Now, we know that's not infallible, because technology is unfortunately fallible, and it's not the sort of magic bullet, but it's still a lot safer than just using username and password. So anywhere where you've got potentially sensitive services, like your work email, connection to bank systems and so on, then multi-factor authentication is a good way to protect that from account compromise. VPNs, I mean, that's always an interesting topic. I feel VPNs are more about privacy rather than security, really, because essentially you're still on the internet. A VPN is not going to stop you from clicking on a link and then following that link, unfortunately. A VPN is not necessarily going to stop a piece of malware, you downloading a bit of malware onto your machine or onto your business machine. It is really more about protecting your own privacy as well, rather than pure security.
Yeah, more about the protection of data in transit, perhaps, or
protecting data in transit for sure.
Yeah.
But if you're accessing public websites, then it's only protected up to a point.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's more beneficial if a lot of people are working remotely and you're using public access points. So where you've got an office infrastructure in place, you might have a VPN back to your office infrastructure, so that the firewall controls can be applied by the office equipment rather than at the shared. There are a lot of attacks that can happen in shared environments, in public environments. So that can be that safety of data in transit.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to look at some festive close down tips, and I'll ask Paris to talk us through these. And then what we'll do is we'll look at how you might build a more secure 2024 for your organization, and Maritz will sort of talk us through that. So I'll hand over to Paris and just look at some tips that would help your organization be more prepared and secure this Christmas.
Yeah, I think there's one of the questions was how could they have avoided it? I think this was to do with the ransomware attack. So some of these tips are controls that can be used against that. So a lot of people will use the same password or permutations of the same password across their different online accounts they have. A lot of people will use one big password for their email, and then they'll use the same password for their work email. So where a breach in a service, there's been quite a few breaches in the past from Adobe, LinkedIn and such. So, of course, now they've pushed resets, but it's essential to use different ones. So if one service is breached, then at least your critical passwords are protected elsewhere. So it's easily available on the dark web. Even you can, when we talk about dark web, we're not talking about, putting things in place. You can simply go on a website and look at it. What is it called? I have been pawned.
You've been pawned.
Yeah, you've been pawned. So you can go on there, put your email, and you see if your email or your passwords are out there. If you see a website saying, put your password in so that we can check if it's breached, do not put it in, because you're giving them your password. Unless it's just something you want to test. But yeah, it's different passwords. So one of the questions that comes back is, how do I manage all these passwords? Do they have to be secure? You can use a password manager. and you can set a large password and then use the manager with different unique passwords for each of your accounts. And that way you can easily access them. Second is ensure all operating systems and applications are up to date and patched. So, we're all guilty of postponing updates, even when our organization pushes them, even your personal devices, as Maritz said earlier, a lot of attacks can move laterally from the personal environment to your work environment and vice versa. And so it's important that you patch your systems so that any vulnerabilities that have been identified have been addressed by the latest release. Another one's ensure firewall controls are valid for your business use case and have been audited. So what happens usually is you might have services in your organization that requires specific firewall set rules to be put in place. Those services are no longer being used, or may have gone out of date if they're not being patched. And if you don't audit those often and look at that in a formal process, then this potential attacker can use that to their advantage. So another one's consider having a pre-holiday audit or a vulnerability assessment. So I think an audit should be a regular occurrence in any organization. So it doesn't have to be a full formal audit. It would just be looking at your external perimeter of your organization. It could be your website, it could be your servers, it could be looking at password changes and how your users' access controls are configured. So that's one of those. And another was, which is probably the most important, I think, it's even you could put as many technical controls in place, but the human aspect is the most vulnerable. And if somebody gives you your password or clicks on a link, it doesn't matter what technical controls you have in place. There's always, I think that's the biggest gateway for an attacker to get through. We've seen a lot of attacks this year using social engineering, where they've just pulled up as IT. We've done that in a couple of our engagements. So staff awareness and educate users on the current cyber threats specifically to your organization's context. So, you might be a small business with no infrastructure and only using your mobile phones to call people. Then a lot of the technical threats might not be there, but you will have threats of social engineering always. Somebody calls you up, as we said, posing as your boss and such. It's a massive problem. So staff awareness and educate users.
Yeah. Is it fair to say, Paris, that when we do work with our clients in a social engineering context, or where we attempt to sort of access their site, that for the most part, our clients are surprised at how accommodating their staff can be?
Absolutely. I think people are nice by nature, almost all of us. And, if you ask nicely, you get what you want. And especially in a corporate environment, in a business environment, it's less likely for someone to challenge you. And, I think this is another point I raised earlier. I think it's important for staff to feel safe to challenge people, even if there are employees, that it should be a two-way street. So if somebody does challenge you, you shouldn't be offended, and you should feel okay to challenge someone. We've had engagements where we've been in offices for almost a whole day, and people tell us where the coffee is, where the server room is, and I think it should be okay to challenge people, and challenge instances where you might feel a little bit, this seems a bit fishy.
Yeah, and go with your instincts and follow them through. Yeah, absolutely. So just a few more here to go through. Yeah,
so I spoke about the secure and supportive environment. So another one is critical data is backed up, and that you test your recovery process. So if it's not, I don't think it's right to say we will never be breached. I think you should always plan for a potential breach, which is why you should have a incident response plan in place, which I'll speak about next. But part of that plan should be all critical data should be backed up. So in the instance of a breach or an incident, you can recover as much as you can prior to that. And then this should be tested regularly. So
just on that one, Paris, I've just one of my colleagues in working since Smith, one of his somebody he knows in the security industry, their company has just been breached probably a little bit earlier this month, where they managed to get hold of an administrator account, and they literally deleted all of their servers. They deleted all of their online backups, to the extent that they just could not recover. So I guess the lesson learned from that is just relying on the sort of built-in recovery of something like Office 365 may not be sufficient if you've got a very determined attacker to damage that's determined to damage the business, because they're not running simple scams. Basically, they are quite clever, knowledgeable people about technology, and they know how people recover, how data is backed up. So always make sure that you've got a backup to the backup, so that if your backups aren't available, that you've got another source of being able to recover the business.
Cybercrime's like any crime, isn't it? There's people commit crime for different reasons. Some commit crime for profit. Some commit crime just to do harm and do damage, and that's where they get their kicks. And that's
It's a bit rarer for that to happen, because mostly cybercrime is about getting the quick buck, making a quick buck, and making a quick buck at scale as well, because obviously the internet is a big place. But unfortunately, it does happen that you do get the attackers who are, or for example, they may ask a ransom, and if you don't pay the ransom, they can be quite disruptive to it.
I think, as Maritz just said, some of them are quite advanced attackers, and that plays with those who are not so advanced. They will likely sell your data along, and then the advanced guys will come in and then do, cause further damage.
A bit of a criminal marketplace in terms of
exactly that
information, absolutely, for that purpose, for sure.
Yeah. So the next one's incident response plan. So most businesses won't have a formal plan in place. If they do, it's most likely to meet some compliance or requirement, or this is something we should do, but it's usually untested. And we do recommend to do a tabletop exercise or a simulation that this is, you test your incident response. At this time of the year, staff might not be around, contact details might have changed, they might be in different locations. So you have to put it into context with the scenarios that might occur at this time of the year. Another one's keep your social media digital footprint small and focused. So I think this was a question from Kim. The question was, do attackers look for businesses that advertise that they are closed during Christmas, for example, out of office messages? Sometimes, yes, they will look at your social media. You might post, we will be closed from this date. Users might be away. So again, if the CEO is away, they might impersonate a CEO or impersonate IT staff as they're away. So there's no way of other people checking, especially if you have a larger organization. It's hard for people to verify who's away and who's actually legitimate. So keep it small and focused. Keep it, don't reveal too much information. We've seen ID badges as well on social media. We've seen, processes written out, sometimes even new staff from mergers, if you merge with a new company, so they can be targets as well. So be selective of what you put online, and be aware of the risks that they may present. It's not that you shouldn't post anything, but be aware of the risks that may come from the information that's there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paris. Yeah, some really good tips there, and I think and that sort of definitely this sort of moves into the not just cybersecurity, but that privacy culture as well, doesn't it? In terms of thinking what do I need to share, what do I need to pass around. So, Maritz, if you could talk us through what we see as a really good blueprint for a more secure 2024, that would be awesome, as we move into the sort of last 10 minutes of today's webinar.
So I'll run through this very quickly. I think really, probably in the spirit of the new year and New Year's resolutions, I think just making a commitment to continuously improve your company's cybersecurity posture will be a good thing. The cybersecurity world is constantly changing. Vulnerabilities are constantly popping up. Cyber criminals are creative folk. They find new ways to exploit systems. They find new ways to exploit people. So it is a bit of a moving feast, and it's not something you can do once in a year and then hope that you're going to be okay for the rest of the year. You need to have something that's sort of running through the year a little bit. If you haven't done so yet, take the time to understand where you potentially might be vulnerable to cyber attacks. What is the systems that you publish to the internet? Have you got websites? Have you got e-commerce sites? Your users obviously on email, so that's a vulnerability for most organizations. You might use cloud services. And from there, you can start building that into sort of areas to improve over the course of the year. So it might be systems, IT systems. You may be running old systems. You may not, your IT service provider, you might not be applying updates very well. You may have poor security configuration or lack of monitoring. So again, build that into your plan in terms of, okay, how are we going to improve those elements within our system? People as well, as we talked about, security awareness, make sure that you've got a plan in place to carry out some measured security awareness training throughout the course of the year. But also that links back to potentially having weak policies and procedures. If you tell your staff to operate in a potentially vulnerable manner, then potentially you're raising your risks around that as well. So your policies and procedures around how you work, what you do around security, should really be reasonably well defined so the staff know what's expected of them as well. And then generally just looking at your business processes as well. You may have some business processes that are potentially insecure in their own right. So for example, how you share data internally or externally, or how you work with suppliers as well. So definitely worth looking at from a system, people, process perspective. Look at maybe considering in phishing simulation and training, keeping your people sharp by testing phishing is always a good idea in terms of making sure that you know where they are from a vulnerability perspective. Definitely. I think
there is. Yeah, and I was just going to say, I mean, in terms of the client feedback from our own clients in terms of phishing simulation and awareness, there's always a feeling of that was a really good investment of time and money, isn't it?
But like anything, it's not something you can do once every 5 years.
No,
because staff change, people change, the business environment change, new opportunities for phishing opportunities arise. So it's again one of those things which sort of links in with the training side of things, and really sort of comes back to sort of having something that's a bit more rolling throughout the course of the year as well.
Yeah, definitely. Just a few more really useful
ones.
I
mean, I'm a big supporter of Cyber Essentials, the UK Cyber Essentials scheme. So commit to Cyber Essentials. So that doesn't mean you have to get certification, but get a copy of the Cyber Essentials scheme and make sure that your business have got those 5 key controls in place around firewalls, access control, anti-malware, software updates, and mobile device security. Test your defenses if you can. So maybe commission vulnerability scans or penetration tests where you are potentially, once you know where you're potentially vulnerable, test how good your controls are in terms of repelling cyber attacks. And then as Paris said as well, test your response capability. You may have incident response plans, you may not have. If you don't have incident response plans, you probably should put some sort of plan in place to say what's your business going to do if you have a big cyber attack, and then test those responses. Yeah. And I think lastly, just don't forget about your suppliers. We all live in a very interconnected world these days. We've got interconnections with suppliers, data transfer to suppliers. Suppliers actually manage a lot of the data on our behalf. Just make sure that their security posture matches your risk appetite as well. And that really depends on how much due diligence you want to apply in terms of understanding how good their security is, and whether that's good enough for you.
Yeah, and number 6 links back to the 4, doesn't it? Because it's a really good idea to ask your suppliers to make sure they've got Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus.
Exactly that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so a bit of a whistle-stop tour.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So in terms of, I mean, a lot of this is, is evidence-based. Some of it is speculation, but generally we think these are the kinds of things that we could probably see next year and beyond. We know we've got this ongoing geopolitical uncertainty with various conflicts around the world. Unfortunately, AI definitely already playing a part, isn't it, in terms of the kinds of attacks that we're seeing, especially in maybe the second half of the year. Phishing is becoming more sophisticated and harder to spot again. So a really good idea to invest in phishing awareness, because our team can make sure that the training and awareness is in step with those advancements in terms of the phishing attacks. Internet of Things being weaponized against businesses. It'd be great to just get a few comments on IoT and what that is and why it's a threat. And yeah, and generally, as I mentioned before, more companies asking for their suppliers to hold Cyber Essentials or Plus. So it'd be good to get a brief understanding of IoT, guys, and how that might manifest itself.
Yeah, I mean, I can pick that one up. So IoT is really everything that we connect to the internet now, all the bits and pieces like cameras, like our alarm systems, building management systems, for example, as well. So I think there's a lot of these systems on the internet now, and they're not necessarily designed to be robust against cyber attack. So essentially what could happen is obviously people could access those devices. So if it's cameras and stuff, they can use that as part of the intelligence gathering, for example. We often find businesses publish their CCTV control system online because they want people to be able to monitor the CCTV from home. That's an ideal way of being able to get eyes on inside the office, for example. So we tend to use that if it's available. But also these devices can be abused in their own right to create distributed denial of service attacks. And we've seen that before with the Mirai bot, where about thousands of devices of a specific manufacturer was compromised, and essentially the attacker could just direct those devices to point to whoever they wanted to attack. So I think the Internet of Things have been with us for a while, and it's not going away. And the industry is sort of wisening up in terms of putting security controls in place, but there's still a lot of poorly secured devices out there. That's worth knowing about.
Our next webinar in the new year will focus very much on the human firewall and your people and their role. It's very much about culture and how to put that together to make sure that your staff are more diligent, they have a better understanding of cybersecurity and privacy awareness, and all of the different activities that you can put in place to have a more secure business. So that's on Thursday, the 18th of January. Again, it's a 10 a.m. start. And speakers there, which have all spoken on previous webinars. And again, those invites will come out after today's session. All that leaves me to say is many thanks, and thank you to Maritz and Paris for all of your support on not just this webinar, but previous events and all the content that you've helped me to put together, which has been a brilliant series so far. And hopefully that will continue, I'm sure, into the new year. And for all of our attendees and those who've registered, I hope you have a wonderful and secure Christmas period. And again, if you've got any specific questions that you think we can help to make your business more secure in the next couple of weeks, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Yeah, so many thanks, and we'll see you all in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.